Here. All right. So this is live, and if I share it to Facebook.
And then I'll watch on here. We can both watch our phones for the Facebook part. Dude. It is delayed. So are you sharing it?
I am. It is now on the page, and I'm going to share it on my private page. So it's all delayed.
Oh god.
And I'm sharing it to YouTube.
YouTube.
Or Twitter, sorry. This will give people a chance to join us. We're live, so
Oh.
watch your mouth.
Huh? The hell did I?
Trauma recovery.
Oh, that's what I wanted to do. Okay, share.
Beautiful. All right. Live in several places.
Okay.
We're still waiting on people to come on in. So hopefully, I'm really hoping that Facebook catches up and we stay live and it doesn't lag. That's the only. We'll find out. I'm going to share this with a few more people. And
Okay, is it on?
It's not on LinkedIn.
No, is it on?
It's on Twitter. It's on Facebook.
Is it on our page?
It's on our page. That's the first place I shared it. And if I go here, when I go to the page, there it is. Nobody has seen it yet.
Oh, okay. I see what's going on now. It takes you to YouTube, so whatever.
That's okay.
Okay, chat is enabled.
Okay. Well, while we let people get in here, and can we see you? Just a little bit more. Sweet. So it looks like we have 3 people, actually. Awesome. Want to say hi?
Well, hello. I'm Coach PJ. This is Coach Joy. And we are the Inside Out Experience team. What we do, we are trauma recovery coaches, and we have several other certifications that go with that as well. I'm also a master certified life coach, for instance. Pepper and I both are certified somatic coaches as well. If you don't know what that is, we'll talk about that as well a little later in the broadcast. But for now, we wanted to begin with a very important question that I'm going to direct to Pepper. Pepper is our resident expert on all things trauma. I am a come lately to the party, but very well equipped nevertheless. but she knows what she's talking about to the point where she's actually written a book called
Rest.
Rest.
The Inside Out Experience Restorative Response System Theory.
Yes. And this is a working theory that we have been employing pretty much all of this year at the very least. A couple of other practitioners have also picked up on it and are also using it in their practice. But the book will be out for public consumption. I'm just going to go with as soon as possible. I'm running into a few wrinkles. I'm working as hard as I can to get this out, because from the mind of Pepper to the pages of a book is an experience. But nevertheless,
that's such a nice way to say I abuse commas
a lot. So yeah. But okay. So I guess the first question that I had when Pepper first started beginning in this space was, what is trauma? Okay, because that's a very loaded word. And to this day, Pepper and I were speaking a few days ago, and I told her, to this day, I don't identify personally as a trauma survivor. And I gave several reasons why, all of which were validated and so forth. But even after the conversation with her, I still do not and will not identify personally as a trauma survivor. That being said, I, to this day, am in trauma recovery. But we're talking semantics at this point. But yes, I am in trauma recovery. So again, question number one, what is trauma? Pepper or Coach Joy? We've all got all kinds of names.
We do. So I would the first thing I would ask you in return is 3 questions. You ask me, what is trauma? And I would ask you, what do you know about trauma? What do you know about trauma recovery? And what is your personal experience with trauma? And I ask those not for you to answer at this time, but I want everyone that's watching this to just sit with those 3 questions. What do you know about trauma? What do you know about trauma recovery? And what is your personal experience with trauma? And as you think about these things, the short answer for what is trauma is anything that disconnects the triad of your existence, and that triad being mind, body, and soul. Mm-hmm. So it is a great disservice in Western culture and psychology to not acknowledge both the body and the soul piece. So when I say mind, I'm also considering that as part of the body. So I'll get into that more because that's part of that somatics piece. So there's trauma recovery, there's somatics, which is part of the healing process from trauma. And then we're also going to talk about your favorite subject, which is shame.
Yeah, that's a big one. Yeah, it wasn't until I started studying trauma really that I really came across how impactful shame is in our everyday goings on. A lot of trauma responses are within the boundaries of shame. They're almost interchangeable. Yes. We were talking about that when we were working on the content piece we released yesterday. Oh no, we released it this morning. Yes. But we were working on it, finishing it up last night, and I was like, is this supposed to be trauma, or were we saying shame here? Because they're
very interchangeable.
They're extremely interchangeable. But let's get back to the original question, because you still haven't answered it.
I did and I didn't. So the short answer is it's a disconnection either between the body or the soul and your reptilian brain, which is what your survival responses are from. So when I say survival responses, I'm talking about the 4 F's, which is fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. Most people understand fight and flight. Mm-hmm. Few people get to into recovery work understanding freeze, and fawn.
Yeah, I actually had never really heard of those, even with a college education, until you started studying trauma recovery.
Right.
And I was like, what the hell is that?
Right. So let me ask you, when I first started, what did you think trauma was?
I thought trauma was I've been shot, I've been attacked, some attack on my person that shook me, that I have memories of that are uncomfortable and unsettling. And uh, yeah, I mean, just an uncomfortable, unsettling experience that, for whatever reason, has remained with me. As an energy healer, I was running into a lot of people that had been traumatized, and they had pains uh, from the trauma, as in
Yep.
a lot of times chronic
Somatic
pain.
memories?
Yes, they're somatic memories, but we're
Yes.
speaking English. So
I'm geeking out.
With those somatic memories come these pockets of energy in their body that we call blocks, and these blocks prohibit things like natural healing. Your body can heal itself, and it's supposed to. That's the only reason to be, well, one of the only reasons why we even need to sleep, because that's the time our body uses to recuperate from all the things that we put it through that day, not only physical, but mental as well. And what I found in these blocks was, wow, all these people have some story about why that block is there. And it's usually based around something non-physical. I'll ask them, and I found this out by accident, because I would start asking questions about, where they've been, who they know, what they do. And it's like, yeah, that started hurting right after I, had some relationship
Life event.
situation, some life event. And it was like, oh, that's trapped in you. And what it caused me to do in my healing practice was to not just go straight at taking out the block. And I had to get trauma informed.
Yes. So that lock, when I talk about that disconnect, sometimes that does look like trapped energy. It is being trapped in the past, thus disconnected from the present moment. That's the disconnect. And this is what trauma does. So trauma can be that minor scraping of the knee. It is often, and I liken it to any inflammation in your life. So if you're feeling emotionally inflamed, if you're feeling physically inflamed, if you're feeling mentally like everything's just on fire in your brain, that is a sign and symptom of trauma, because it's a disconnect. You can't figure out a problem. You can't figure out the answer. You're in disconnect. There is a trauma that is playing a role in there somewhere. The same is true of shame. So where there is trauma, there is shame. However, just because shame is present doesn't always mean there is also a trauma present. And that's important, because what happens in a trauma cycle where we're not going to a healing space, but we're just trying to move forward, we get stuck in a cycle. And that cycle is, we're shaming our shame, traumatizing ourselves, internalizing our shame and our trauma, and locking it into our identity. And we start identifying in a disconnected space as our trauma, as our shame. And this is important to know, because when we start identifying as our trauma and our shame, we start behaving in ways that are in service to survival.
Okay. We're going to push pause right there, because again,
I could keep going, but yes,
our
please
audience
interrupt.
may not understand what you mean when you say service to survival. So there were two things that I heard in that explanation you were giving. Number one is the reptilian brain. Your average person, I don't believe, is familiar with that terminology.
Okay.
They might think that you mean something completely other that they saw on TV or what have you.
Mm-hmm.
But we need to explain what do we mean by reptilian brain,
Mm-hmm.
and what do we mean by trauma cycle?
Yes. So the reptilian brain, there are 3 brains. There is the reptilian brain.
They're all one brain.
They're all in the same brain. So
Yeah.
actually, let me just lean forward here. I'm gonna pull this out. This is what I do. Here's a brain and a brainstem. Okay. Your reptilian brain resides down in this lower part. All of this is your higher consciousness brain. This is what we teach survivors to tap into and live within. It's also, but then there's your conscious brain, and then the subconscious or higher conscious brain. Okay. So when we talk about the reptilian brain, that brain is for the purposes of survival here in this 3D world. It is your body's brain. It tells you, it speaks through your autonomic nervous system, of which I have a lovely chart back here, but it speaks through your autonomic nervous system. What are primary functions that need to go offline in a moment of a trauma response or trauma trigger? And I'll get into that a little bit more as I talk about cycles, trauma cycles. But know that for now, when you think about your brain, you have 3 brains in that brain. And the reptilian brain is the one specific to Earth survival.
Meaning that is the part of your brain that's responsible for your survival. And in most people, it's, especially these days, what I'm noticing is that's the part of the brain that most people are using to function
Dominantly.
all day.
Yep.
And it's not the part of the brain that serves our higher good.
No. Matter of
I'll
fact,
put it that way.
It keeps you trapped in the past. It helps you survive in the moment while keeping you trapped in the past. It does not serve you in thriving.
Because its job is to survive.
Right.
So think about what is the least thing that you need to do to survive.
Yep.
And sometimes it's fight, sometimes it's run, sometimes it's fawn or freeze. And if you're operating throughout your day in that manner, you're stuck in what we call a trauma cycle. Yep. Which, Pepper, will you please explain that?
So you've probably heard the phrase poor money mindset. This is that low impulse control, the way somebody who is hungry spends $20 versus the way someone whose belly is full spends $20 is very different. So when we talk about that trauma cycle in conjunction with shame, we, especially from childhood, if you are conditioned in this way, and I'm a person that was conditioned to either participate in the trauma via a fawning response, which is like a violating your sovereignty act. Sometimes we run from our problems chronically. If it looks like danger or even just discomfort, because again, early on in development, it's an attachment thing. So when we want to attach, shame is one of the first experiences we have in the attachment detachment experience in life. So out of that, we can get caught up in a cycle, a mindset, a core belief, and thus make it part of our identity, this trauma cycle. In the case, a really good example of this is children who grow up with a narcissistic parent. So at least one parent who it's all about them. Everything that the family does is in accordance to what they want done. And sometimes that revolves around religion. Sometimes that revolves around politics. Sometimes that revolves around both.
Sometimes it's a person.
Sometimes it's a person. But it's about a dominant power that everyone else yields to. Everyone else fawns to. Everyone else is made to believe they're crazy. And that person is the only reason that we're all sane and can keep it together. And so when you grow up like that and you find yourself then as an adult and decisions are yours to make, consequences are yours to suffer all on your own, And you are then operating with that voice in your head of this conditioned narcissist who has conditioned you to survive, not thrive. You make decisions in service to survival over and over again. And in doing that, you get stuck in the past, as we've said, but also your choices continue to get worse and worse.
Now, it also should be said that in that example, this is a specific example of a person with a narcissistic parent.
Right.
Those same things, though, can happen in a situation where you're not dealing with a narcissist.
It's
These
true.
same things can just happen because someone is leading
Also in service to survival.
in service to survival. Let me try to think of another example of this.
When have you lived in service to survival?
We usually live in service to survival when we are what we call triggered. Okay. For instance, you're in a situation that you've been in before and it didn't work out. So you panic and your brain streamlines you to the past instead of looking at the present moment. I had a session with a client yesterday where I was talking about their relationship with the past. And I said to them, you're stuck there because you're looking there. You won't find the answers to what you're facing today in yesterday, because yesterday's gone. And it's like a picture of a person that's walking. Okay, you're walking forward. Okay, we're all going forward in this linear world. If you're moving backwards in this linear world, let me know, because I want to get in touch with the people that designed your time machine. But seriously, if you're walking forward and you're looking peripherally and behind yourself, you can't even see all of the options that exist in the now for you to discover.
And that's so important, because when you want to move out of a space of survival and into thriving, and you want to do better in your life, it's literally, the reason we have the name is it's an inside outward experience. One of the first things that I do with my clients is start combating shame and teach them how to show themselves compassion. Because when you're stuck in a trauma cycle, you're stuck in a mindset, you're stuck in poor habits, poor practices, things that don't serve you, it's usually an internalized shaming or self-traumatization where you're just stuck with some pain that you can't move out, or some energy that's not serving you in any way but to survive. So you have to go inward. And I say that because another modality that we use in our practice is something called internal family systems and parts work. And this is essentially the act of going inward and finding your part, your personality, your mask, your character.
And it was in me discovering parts work where I realized that I was even carrying trauma.
And that is one reason why you shouldn't do parts work alone. Do it with an expert. But yes, that's a really good point, because parts work is that sometimes you don't even know what that inner fire, inflammation, or disconnect is until you get in there and start working with characteristics, masks, parts that you've developed and or kept and carried as a result of trying to survive trauma. So, with that being said, I'm kind of curious if we have any questions going on. I'm all over the internet. I'm going back and forth between Facebook and trying to see if there's any comments there.
Oh, I guess I should have been doing that.
But I want to, while you check that out, I want to reiterate that, yes, parts work is something we use in our practice. And it is one of my favorite modalities, because in parts work, one of the first things that we do is we start showing compassion to our inner self, to our innermost thoughts, where we feel pain from the inside. And when we start showing ourselves compassion on the inside and start changing that narrative, we start changing that mindset, we start having different experiences, we start cycling through something more than trauma. And that is where thriving starts happening. Let me see.
And really, it's all about bringing your mind to the present. One of the other features, for lack of a better term, of the reptilian brain is that it's a past junkie.
Oh, yes, that's such a great, like it's an addict for real.
Yeah.
That is such a great comparison.
Your reptilian brain is a past junkie. And the reason it is because its job is to keep you alive. So what I mean by that is it wants to make your, we'll call it experience, but it's really not so experiential because it's just repeating. Yeah, I'm at a loss for words on this, but the reptilian brain will streamline processes for you. For instance, your routine every day. Okay. I talk about routine and habit a lot. And I talk about that because you don't do any of those things from a conscious state of mind.
No.
They are just things that you do. Your body actually knows how to do it without your participation. Everything from the route you drive to work, the way you brush your teeth every day, you get up at the same time every day. And I'm not saying that these aren't things that you should or shouldn't do. Okay, you do what you want, but I am telling you that most of us, okay, and I won't even put a number on it because I don't know, I don't have the science on it, but most of us spend at bare minimum 70% of our day doing things that we've already done, and we're looking for different results.
So when you think about that, think about how living in a cycle of trauma can be like muscle memory for living.
Yeah. And it puts a whole new spin on things like that person that just won't leave that abusive relationship. It's safe. They know they'll live.
They know the danger that they live with.
And they're stuck in that lower portion of their brain that says you're surviving.
Right.
It's all good. And they get up and they go through the same cycle with this abuser again and again and again because they're stuck in the reptilian brain outside the window of capacity.
Yes. Yes. And we'll talk more about the window of capacity in a bit, but
I just geeked out, my bad.
We have two questions. The first one is, what inspired you to start the Inside Out experience?
Well, actually, I started the Inside Out experience formerly the Inside Out solution, but Pepper didn't care for that because we don't want to act like anything is final. It's a journey.
Yeah.
So it was a healing practice that I started with when I started sharing my energy healing gifts. And it morphed into what it is today, which is trauma recovery, because I really believe that, again, once I started doing parts work myself and recognized the parallels between what my wife was doing and what I was doing, I said, well, shoot, we're both healing. You know what I'm saying? I need to learn what you know, and you need to learn what I know, and we need to go forward with that. Always, I think I can speak for us both when I say that we've always had a heart for people, not just in the generic sense, but I really do mean it when I say that I want to help you live your best life from the inside out, because that's what I'm after. That's what everybody's after. And along with that comes setting aside judgments, setting aside preconceived notions, setting aside prejudices, setting aside basically everything that doesn't have anything to do with your experience. You can't help somebody live their best life inside out if you take them out of the picture and tell them how to live, We don't do that.
Right. And and just to add to that yes, I started out working with animals, and I've always had a heart for people, but needed to do my own healing journey a bit. And for me, that has always been with Mother Nature. So that morphed into, I was going through some of my own traumas and doing my own recovery, and really found myself, because of my experiences, because of my healing journey, being not just qualified, but having a very intimate understanding of the workings of trauma and shame and healing and the mess of that. So to be able to bring that full circle, and in so many ways, I could go on and on honestly about this, but in so many ways this comes full circle for me, to be able to turn around and help people. And that's how I know I've gone from a space of surviving trauma and being stuck in a survival mindset to a more a thriving space. When I say thriving and living your best life, I don't want to give you this idea that I'm talking about we're all going to be one percenters and billionaires. And I'm talking about living with minimal suffering.
Yeah.
Living with compassion, living from a space of curiosity and courage. And instead of being afraid of life, instead of being afraid of differences, instead of being afraid of humanity just because trauma exists, So yes, I agree. And also,
Well, there was also, at least for you, you were kind of chosen for this. Your coach slash therapist invested in you
true.
to learn about trauma recovery because she noticed an aptitude when in your sessions. So it was not just this natural thing. You got a little push, and
It's true.
and since then you've just done nothing but explode into space, and you know have even gotten to the point, like I said, to where you have written about it and written well about it, if I do insert.
Thank you. Thank you.
But we also noticed in when we were working with animals full time that the people that we were attracting were traumatized and there was nothing wrong with their animals that they wanted us to fix. It was them. Or if there was something wrong with their animal, it was easily fixed, but also just as easy for them to go backward because of the person that was handling them.
Yep. Yes.
So we first started doing this work, 2-3 years ago, before
almost 5 years ago.
Yeah.
Now. And we hit it hard a few years ago, full throttle. And in the last couple of years, it was just very apparent to us that where the healing needed to happen, it's one thing to do it in the pet owner relationship because it's a very vulnerable relationship. But if they're not ready for the healing, that really makes it hard.
Mm-hmm.
So to find people that are ready for the healing, and that leads us to this next question here, which is, could you share what you learned about yourself from your own journey that may help others take steps to start theirs?
Huh. You want me to go first?
Yes, I do, actually.
Did you read the question again?
What were some things that got you started in your own journey that might help inspire others to also?
The thing that got me started on my own journey again was doing parts work, or at the time I called it shadow work. And that, in concert with the growth that I had seen in Coach Joy, really made me want to dive in and understand what was going on with me. I was coming off of a pretty bad injury, and had a lot of time to figure a lot of things out because along with that injury came chronic pain. And I don't know if you've ever been in pain for extended periods of time, but it is no fun. And what that chronic pain did was it shot me back to an 18 or 19-year-old version of myself that had been operated on. And I was recovering from a spinal fusion surgery, which was extremely painful. Okay, the recovery was extremely painful. I mean, I was literally filleted. So it compounded, if you will, the injury that I was dealing with at the time. And it wasn't even all that local to the other. You know what I mean? And it was like, why do I feel this here too? You know? And the questions just started me moving toward wanting to figure those things out. And ultimately, it came down to, well, if I'm dealing with this, if I'm dealing with past hurts today, I mean, I call myself a healer and I can't heal this. I can't do something with my hands or source some energy from the universe to make this go away. Okay, I can find comfort, but I can't make it go away unless I go back inside and find that 19-year-old kid and tell him I love him, and that I not only love him, but I appreciate the experience that he's gone through, and that it's okay because I'm fine, and I'm not only surviving, but I intend to thrive as well.
I love that. I love that, your first step was to go in and show yourself compassion.
Yeah.
So you went back to your 19-year-old self and validated his pain that, I'm sure in some ways that was necessary.
Oh, yeah.
Validating that, honoring that.
Well, because another thing that comes with chronic pain is the shame piece, because people that have never experienced it don't have any patience for you. And I experienced that as well. And I'm not saying you were mean, but because you weren't, but it gets tired. It's like, damn, you can't get up now. You can't do this. You can't do that. You can't go for a walk. You don't want to do this. You don't want to do that. It sucks.
Yeah.
So I really wanted to get through that.
Right.
And I wanted to get through it. And it took a lot of introspection to accomplish that. And it's not just I did this thing and now it's done. It's a lifestyle now. It's a lifestyle of calling yourself out and recognizing signs when they reveal themselves.
Yes. And this is where the REST theory comes in. So the REST theory is restorative response system theory. And it is meeting the 4 trauma responses being fight, flight, freeze, or fawn with rhythm, rise, resolve, and reframe. So I bring that up because when throughout life, people get triggered. And those triggers are a sign of, I need healing. And so when I see someone coming at me with anger or shame, I don't take that as a personal attack anymore. I can only hear, because of the fact that I'm tapped into rest, I can only hear, I'm in pain. I'm crying for love. I need compassion. I need someone with courage to get curious about this with me. And what makes trauma recovery coaches different from a therapist is, we're not subscribed to Western psychology. We tap into our ancestral piece. We tap into the cultural piece. We tap into the relevant intersectionalities of life and life experience, which is a broad way of saying all the details that make your life experience unique to you. Which
is extremely important.
It's extremely important because how you are oriented to the world, the way as a white woman I grew up, where I grew up, the influences around me in both my family and the culture and the mindsets and the habits of our local people is very different from your orientation to the world. And that's okay. Like, those shouldn't be things that separate us and cause more shame and trauma. Those should be things that we can bring those experiences together and share them in a safe space from compassion, courage, and curiosity. And it starts by allowing ourselves that space within. So, one of the things that we do is we are facilitating safe space for people to go within where they're afraid to go. It's a scary thing to sit there and think about the pain you're in and going deeper with that to find out where else does it come from.
Well, another example of what I mean when I say it's a maintenance thing. I had a situation, I think it was last month, where I was talking to my mom about 4-year-old me. And I hadn't realized before, I think it happened in here, in this very room. We were talking after work. And I had never mourned my aunt. Okay, I had an aunt that was my grandmother's sister, and she used to take me on vacation with her. And I went on vacation with her down south to Georgia, where my family is from, as far back as I can find. That's another place where Black people are not like white people. I don't know what place my ancestors ultimately came from to find themselves in America. But I went down there, and on the way home, she died. And I was 4 years old and all alone in a strange place. Another thing that I hadn't really noticed before that conversation was that I was surrounded by white people that I'd never laid eyes on for the first time in my life, because my life was very bubble oriented. I mean, like most 4-year-olds, okay? I lived in a Black neighborhood, went to a Black church, all these other things. And now I'm surrounded by these white people who I've, to this point, really only seen in stores and on television. Okay. I've never really had any kind of interaction with them per se. And now they are trying to care for me in a traumatized state to boot. And let me get to the part of it that was important. I'm sorry, but I had to give a little background. I get home. They get me to Philadelphia International, and I'm walking down the jetway holding this escort's hand, and I see my mother and my father, but I really only saw my mother, to be perfectly honest. And when our eyes met, she got down on her knees and held her arms out, and that's the international sign for "come to me." So I did.
Attachment.
I ran to my mother. My mother scooped me up and held me and lost her mind. And in that moment, I switched to I've got to protect my mother. So I began to tell her and stroke her head and tell her, "It's okay, Mom. I'm fine. It's okay. It's okay." And from that moment until a month ago, I had never released the trauma of that 4-year-old boy and all those things that he went through. And I had never told that 4-year-old boy that I was proud of him for even getting home. You know what I mean? And I did that night, and it was beautiful. And it was completely organic. I don't even know how it came up, but it was completely organic. But when I got the opportunity, I seized it. I seized on that moment, and it was safe to do so because I had company that cared and was helping me guide my way through it. And there were a few times where she's like, "You need it?" I was like, no. I'm going to keep going. I'm going to keep going into this. And we just explored everything. And it turned into a session, which is like, we don't practice on each other.
We don't.
So, but in this case, it just happened to work that I was with someone that was informed.
And I appreciate you sharing that, because it is so, so important that when we walk through life, we understand that need for validation, that need for an attachment it's life. It is calling for life. It is asking someone to show up, hold space for, honor this. And it can be the trauma you experienced in that moment, let's just unpack that if we may for just a moment. But there was your trauma from a loss of someone who was also like a mother to you.
Quite.
There is your mother and her loss, and that provoked within you a caregiver to comfort her, thus taking authentic, full Jimmy and saying, I'm going to recess you for now and create this safe space for my mom and her trauma.
Right.
Right. And this is something children are actually really great at this. So it doesn't surprise me that it went that way. But then,
well, what I also noticed in that moment, which we even talked about that night, sorry to cut you off, but we had said something about this a little earlier, and I want to explain to people why this is. Because I started seeing counselors and psychiatrists, psychologists, therapists
as a child.
As a child from 4 years old. My parents did all the right things, but these people weren't trauma informed, and they weren't grief informed, and they didn't understand how to help me. So I was stuck for the better part of 48 years?
Yeah.
I was stuck for 48 years in the same stinking place on that jetway at Philadelphia International Airport. A part of me was stuck there not because these people didn't want to help me. I mean, they were paid very well. Right. Judging by where I was getting the treatment from, they were paid very handsomely to help me. So even if that was the only motivation, it was in their best interest to show progress, and there was none.
And it's important too to know that, like, especially in the day and time, it's easy for society to have us thinking forward motion is trauma recovery.
And it's not.
Just because you moved on doesn't mean you healed. And you can move on with an infected wound, and what happens is I liken it to an infected limb. Yeah. You're going to walk around with this infected limb, dragging it all the way till it finally falls off, and only then can you start healing. You could also see a trauma recovery coach in the interim and have that limb treated.
Right.
Just saying.
But there's also, like, in that analogy, there's also opportunity for whatever about that limb is poison to you to spread into other areas of your life. And that's what happened to me for 48 years of carrying around grief.
So when you say that, let's talk about what other times did you run into a 4-year-old?
I have 5 children, so at least 5 times.
And when you think about them at 4 and you with them at 4.
I was at that point, I was a tough kid. I didn't suffer fools or foolishness. And it's important for kids to be able to be a kid. And there was some.
You can see the ripples.
Yeah,
you can see the ripples is the point.
You understand, yeah.
And that is another reason why, if you are a parent or a grandparent, if you are an auntie, if you are someone's other mother, it is so vital that you heal. Because even if you don't identify as one with trauma or as one who has survived trauma, which is fine, you still benefit in healing work and how you can be healing to others.
Right.
So one of the things that initially actually attracted me to you was not just this amazing sermon that you spoke, but also that you carried with you a healing presence. Because even though you still had an injured 4-year-old self and you still had an injured 19-year-old self, you'd also already been doing a lot of work that was conducive to healing and trauma recovery before you had vernacular for that.
Right.
And that's because all of us have this, by the way, but some of us are more tapped into it than others. But the human capacity for compassion is greater than our capacity for self-preservation.
Yeah.
And with that truth, when you look at your life, you can still be very healing for people, but in your intention to be healing too, you can also cause harm unintentionally.
Oh, for sure.
Which is,
Yeah.
and I say that because you talked about, you saw therapists, you saw counselors, you saw professionals who, because they didn't have grief training and they weren't trauma informed, didn't help you
At all. God bless them, but not at all.
And this is not to poo-poo on therapists and counselors, because there's some great ones out there who really do the work from a compassionate heart. But it is to say,
and even trauma informed.
It is also to say that trauma recovery coaches across the board are healers. And we're trying to legitimize the work of healers with the branding of trauma recovery. And the reason for coaching is because coach automatically gives us way more scope in areas that your therapist can't have.
And we're never going to tell you what to do.
No, we are completely client-led. And that might scare some people to hear that. When I say client-led, it doesn't mean that we're allowing you to come in and run amok in our office. It does mean that you get to practice sovereignty and autonomy right at the gate.
Exactly.
So if there's at any point in your session that we must stop, pause, hold space for, I heard today, posse up, and gather around and just sit with a thing or not go in a direction. That's where we can do that, where your therapists and counselors tend to have kind of like a checklist of like, these are the things we need to do, and you're resisting me, and that's why you're not making forward motion. And if I find you're resisting me, we're going to explore the why of the resistance and not treat it as, well, that's an illness.
Well, okay. And this is the last time I'm going to poop on therapists, but I did hear from a client this week that their therapist told them they were broken.
And we hear this a lot.
That broke my heart. That literally broke my heart. I'm like, wow. Okay. And I just had one question. I said, well, let me ask you this. And again, I'm not telling this person to fire their therapist or anything like that. They can do that if they want. And it won't matter to me one way or another. I'm still going to try my best to help them move toward healing.
But it sounds like she's being treated in service to survival.
Yes. And I'm like, so what do you even need that kind of, even if it's true, what do you need that kind of talk for? What point did that serve? That person that told her this was saying, if you don't get better, it's not my fault because you're broken.
So with that, I want to segue into our last 10 minutes here. I'm going to share a little bit about myself, because this question here is relevant to my own story as a survivor. So the question is, how could you help someone who knows or has trauma from a younger age, but doesn't remember it, doesn't have good memory recall with it? Okay. So.
Yeah, you know all about that.
Trigger warning. I am a rape and incest survivor. My earliest trauma started around the age of 3. I was instrumentally raped by a half-sibling. And I'm sharing this deep, vulnerable truth with you to let you know how deeply I understand. I grew up with trauma, and I grew up with shame, and I also grew up with compassion. And I also grew up with a love for people and somehow myself. And so I share that to say that there are times in my childhood where I have absolutely no memory. I actually will get a physical sensation in my body somewhere sometimes when I think about that time period of my life. But to pull out a specific memory, I don't have it. And when I became an adult, I was in a situation where I was being held against my will and did not have memory of daily trauma that was happening to my body by this person that I was living with. And even still, I cannot recall half of that time span that I was there. I know it happened. I have proof that it happened. and I have sensations about it in my body, and I will have flashes of memories sometimes, but I could not give you a full play-by-play on every single thing. And I share that with you because what I have learned in my own recovery, when I first started this, I was told, I shared this with you, I was told that my brain was broken because I was traumatized from my adolescence. And in my developmental stages, my brain, literally one part of it swelled, another part of it shrank, and they became chronic in that state, and then they quit working. So my brain was considered offline, and my ability to make choices out of anywhere but a space of serving to survive, I was never going to make good choices. I was never going to make thriving choices. That's what I was told by a professional. And then I met, a few years down the road, through some amazing coincidences, but not really, I met a person who was pioneering this thing called trauma recovery coaching, because they themselves had been through trauma, had been through trauma treatment, had been given that lifelong diagnosis of your brain is chronically broken, you're going to be suffering depression throughout your life, probably also anxiety, might want to get some good exercises for dealing with panic attacks. Good luck. And here's a prescription. And then you go through the prescription cycle and all that to say, none of that was true. My brain is not still broken. I do tend to carry more neurodivergent tendencies with my brain because I've had to rewire my brain and retrain it and work without the original executive functions that were my inheritance. In that, I've also been able to tap into my higher consciousness, into what I believe to be the actual God, and heal to the point that I'm helping others find their way there too. Your healing journey is yours. Your ability to resource yourself and heal, just like your trauma can be inherited and imprinted on you, so is your healing. Your ancestors have prayed, fought, and warred for, if that's a word, warred for you to have healing. And what we do is help you on your healing journey with psychoeducation, somatic exercises, teaching you to reconnect with your soma, with your body, because trauma often causes a disconnect in the body. And when we start getting aware of our bodies again, we can start healing our mind, we can start healing our soul. And that is trauma recovery. I just want to make sure we don't have any more questions before we move on. So that is what got me into this. And I'm grateful for the healing journey. I'm not going to say I'm grateful for trauma, but I am.
Yeah, that's something else.
Not on that level, but I am absolutely grateful for a healing journey, because the wonderful people that I've met, the beautiful healing that I have experienced in my life, as well as facilitated with others in theirs, it is truly, that's living your best life from the inside out.
Yeah. And that's the other thing, is like paying it forward. You know, you can learn a lot from us. I mean, I continue to learn every session that I do, whether I'm being coached or whether I'm coaching someone else. I learn something about humanity and the human condition in every one of them, and it just broadens my capacity for compassion, which, you know, a long time ago I wouldn't have thought was such a good thing, but it absolutely is, because, you know, at the end of the day, we are one, and the sooner that we can understand and appreciate that, I think the better off the world will be. And I consider what I do now to be not only necessary, but absolutely righteous. Absolutely righteous. And that's important to be as well.
Beautiful. I think that's all the questions we have. If you did ask questions and we didn't see it because we're still learning social media, we're all tired. We are all tired with Zoom.
Yeah,
and
put it in the put it in the chat or in the
We will
comment
answer
box.
questions, and we will be teaching classes in the future on trauma recovery, and we'll even and shame.
Yeah, shame is a big one.
So those 3 things you'll see us talking a lot about in the future: shame, trauma recovery, and somatics.
Oh, check out the shame piece on our channel that was just released.
Yes, we'll also post it in the comments.
Okay.
So check those things out. As you guys move forward, I hope you will feel compelled to show yourself compassion and courage and curiosity. And with that, live your best life from the inside out.
Thanks, guys. All right, now go to edit.